Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Robert Bobby Hayes stood in his home office, reviewing the quarterly reports for his construction company, Hayes and Associates. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single bulldozer inherited from his father and transforming it into the largest excavation and demolition company in 3 counties. His calloused hands told the story of a man who had worked his way up from operating heavy machinery to commanding a fleet of them. The sprawling ranch house in Millfield Estates reflected his success. 6 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and 8 acres of perfectly manicured land. Bobby had bought it 5 years ago as a symbol of what hard work and determination could achieve. More importantly, it was meant to be the foundation for the family he and his wife Linda were building together. Linda Hayes, named Morrison, had been the catch of their small town. A former beauty queen turned real estate agent, she possessed the kind of effortless charm that made clients trust her instantly. At 38, she maintained her striking blonde hair and athletic figure with religious dedication to yoga and Pilates. When they married 12 years ago, everyone said they were the perfect couple, the self-made man and the sophisticated woman who could navigate any social situation. Their son Trevor, now 16, had inherited his mother's quick wit and his father's stubborn determination. A star quarterback at Millfield High, he seemed destined for greatness. Their daughter Sophia, 14, showed early signs of her mother's social intelligence and her father's business acumen, already running successful fundraising campaigns for her school. But perfection, Bobby had learned, was often an illusion. The first crack in his perfect world had appeared 6 months ago during a family barbecue. Linda had been unusually distracted, constantly checking her phone and claiming it was work emergencies. Real estate was busy, sure, but Bobby had built his fortune by paying attention to details others missed. The way she held her phone at an angle when typing, the nervous laugh when asked about her late meetings, the new expensive perfume she claimed was a gift from a client. These weren't the behaviors of someone discussing property listings. Bobby had survived the ruthless world of construction by trusting his instincts. Those same instincts now screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with his marriage. He had built his empire on the principle that knowledge was power, and he intended to gather all the knowledge he needed. The children had begun showing signs of strain as well. Trevor had become increasingly disrespectful, questioning Bobby's authority and making snide comments about old-fashioned values. Sophia, once Daddy's little girl, now seemed to view him with barely concealed disdain. They rallied around their mother whenever Bobby questioned anything, forming a united front that felt more like an armed rebellion. Bobby's own background had shaped him into someone who didn't accept betrayal lightly. Raised by a single father after his mother abandoned them when he was 8, he had learned early that loyalty was the most valuable currency in the world. His father, Frank Hayes, had worked himself to death rather than abandon his son, teaching Bobby that a man's word was his bond and that betrayal was unforgivable. The construction industry had reinforced these lessons. In a world where a handshake could mean millions of dollars and trust determined whether projects succeeded or failed, Bobby had built his reputation on absolute reliability. He had destroyed competitors who tried to undercut him with false promises, and he had elevated partners who proved their loyalty. It was a simple code. Loyalty was rewarded, betrayal was punished, and second chances were for the weak. As Bobby closed his laptop and prepared for another evening of pretending everything was normal, he reflected on how his father's lessons had prepared him for many things, but not for the possibility that his own family might become his enemies. The thought should have devastated him, but instead, it crystallized his resolve. If his family had chosen to betray him, they would learn the same lesson he had taught his business competitors over the years. In Bobby's world, loyalty was everything, and betrayal came with a price that had to be paid in full. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The truth came to Bobby on a Tuesday evening in March, delivered by an unlikely messenger. Danny Morrison, Linda's younger brother, had always been the family's black sheep, a small-time gambling addict who bounced between jobs and relationships. He appeared at Bobby's office after hours, nervous and sweating despite the cool spring air. "Bobby, we need to talk," Danny said, unable to meet his brother-in-law's eyes. "It's about Linda." Bobby had known this moment would come eventually. For months, he had been conducting his own investigation with a methodical precision that had made him successful in business. Hidden cameras in strategic locations around the house, GPS tracking on Linda's car, and careful analysis of financial records had painted a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Danny's confession merely confirmed what Bobby already suspected. Linda was having an affair with Craig Hoffman, a successful plastic surgeon who had recently divorced his own wife. Dr. Hoffman, 45 years old and devastatingly handsome, owned a practice in the city and drove the kind of luxury cars that turned heads. More damaging than the affair itself was the systematic way Linda and the children had been lying to cover it up. "Trevor and Sophia know," Danny admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've been covering for her for months, taking turns being alibis when she goes to see him. They think you're some kind of dinosaur who doesn't deserve the truth." The children's betrayal cut deeper than Linda's infidelity. Bobby had sacrificed everything to provide for his family, working 18-hour days to build the company that paid for their privileged lifestyle. Every vacation, every private school tuition, every designer outfit had been funded by his sweat and determination. To discover that his own children viewed him with contempt was almost unbearable. But Bobby Hayes hadn't built an empire by wallowing in self-pity. "Why are you telling me this?" Bobby asked Danny directly. Danny shifted uncomfortably. "Because Craig's been sniffing around Mom's house. Our mother is 83 years old, Bobby, and she's got that big insurance policy. Craig's been real interested in her health lately, offering to review her medications, talking about how she should update her will. I think he's planning something, and I can't let that happen." This revelation transformed Bobby's understanding of the situation entirely. Dr. Craig Hoffman wasn't just stealing his wife. He was a predator who saw vulnerable people as opportunities. Bobby's methodical investigation had revealed that Craig's recent divorce had been financially devastating. His ex-wife had taken half his assets, and his practice was struggling with malpractice insurance costs. A lonely, wealthy widow like Danny's mother would be an attractive target. Bobby spent the next week conducting deeper research into Craig's background. What he discovered was illuminating. Craig had been married 3 times before his recent divorce. His first wife had died in what was ruled an accidental overdose of prescription medication. His second wife had suffered a series of mysterious health crises that required expensive treatments at Craig's clinic. His third wife had divorced him after discovering he had been systematically drugging her to make her more compliant. None of these discoveries had resulted in criminal charges. Craig was too smart for that. But they painted a picture of a man who viewed relationships as business transactions and people as resources to be exploited. Linda, with her successful real estate career and access to Bobby's wealth, was simply his latest target. The realization that his wife and children had aligned themselves with a dangerous predator completed Bobby's transformation. He was no longer a betrayed husband seeking answers. He was a protector preparing for war. His family had made their choice, and now they would live with the consequences of that choice. Bobby began making careful preparations. His father had taught him that when you strike an enemy, you strike once and you strike to end the fight permanently. He would need to be patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. The construction business had taught him how to tear down structures completely, leaving nothing salvageable behind. Dr. Craig Hoffman had chosen the wrong family to destroy, and Linda Hayes had chosen the wrong man to betray. They would both learn that Bobby Hayes was not the kind of man who forgave or forgot. The time for pretending had ended. Now it was time to build a trap so perfect that his enemies would walk into it willingly, believing they were about to claim their ultimate victory. Chapter 3: The Architect of Ruin. Bobby's plan began with a careful study of his enemy's weaknesses and desires. He approached it like any major construction project: detailed blueprints, precise timing, and contingency plans for every possible complication. The difference was that this project was designed to destroy rather than build. Craig Hoffman's weakness was his greed and his need to maintain his public image as a successful doctor. Linda's weakness was her desire for social status and her belief that she was smarter than everyone around her. The children's weakness was their teenage certainty that they understood the world better than their father. Bobby's first move was financial. He began systematically moving assets out of joint accounts and investments, using his knowledge of business structures to create a maze of legal entities that would be nearly impossible to untangle quickly. He wasn't stealing. Everything he moved was legally his, but he was ensuring that when the time came, Linda would discover that her luxurious lifestyle was built on quicksand. Simultaneously, he used his connections in the construction and real estate industries to gather intelligence on Craig's financial situation. What he learned was even worse than he had suspected. Craig owed nearly $2 million in malpractice settlements that hadn't been publicly disclosed yet. His practice was hemorrhaging money, and he was desperately seeking investors to keep it afloat. This information gave Bobby the perfect opening for his trap. Using a shell company, Bobby approached Craig about investing in a new medical facility. The proposal was irresistible, a state-of-the-art plastic surgery center that would cater to wealthy clients seeking complete discretion. Bobby, posing as a silent partner through intermediaries, offered to provide the initial funding in exchange for a controlling interest in the facility. Craig's greed overcame his caution. Within weeks, he had signed contracts that effectively put him completely at Bobby's mercy, though he didn't realize it yet. The contracts contained clauses that would allow Bobby to call in the entire investment immediately if certain conditions weren't met, conditions that Bobby could trigger at will. While setting this financial trap, Bobby also worked on gathering evidence of Linda's affair that would be devastating in divorce proceedings. His hidden cameras captured not just the infidelity itself, but Linda and Craig planning to manipulate Bobby's mother-in-law's will. They discussed how Linda would convince the elderly woman to change her beneficiaries, cutting out Danny and leaving everything to Linda, who would then share it with Craig. The children's participation in these schemes was perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery. Trevor had been tasked with stealing documents from Bobby's home office, photographing financial records that Craig wanted to analyze. Sophia had been manipulating her grandmother during visits, subtly planting ideas about how Bobby was financially irresponsible and how Linda would be a better steward of the family money. Bobby realized that his entire family had become conspirators in a plot not just to betray him, but to systematically steal everything he had built. They weren't just having an affair. They were conducting a careful campaign to destroy him financially and emotionally. The depth of their planning revealed something chilling about their characters. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated, long-term strategy to use Bobby's love for his family against him. They had counted on his trust, his desire to maintain family harmony, and his reluctance to believe the worst about people he loved. They had miscalculated fatally. Bobby spent the remaining weeks of spring putting the final pieces of his plan into place. He arranged for Craig's malpractice issues to become public knowledge at precisely the wrong moment. He ensured that Linda's real estate license would be questioned due to ethical violations in her handling of client funds, violations that Bobby carefully documented and reported to the state licensing board. Most importantly, he prepared to reveal the truth about their scheme in a way that would maximize the damage to their reputations and their futures. Bobby's plan wasn't just about ending his marriage or exposing the affair. It was about ensuring that everyone who had betrayed him would face consequences severe enough that they would never be tempted to cross him again. The construction business had taught Bobby that when you demolished a building, you had to be absolutely certain that nothing salvageable remained. The same principle applied to his marriage and his relationship with his children. By the end of May, everything was in place. Bobby had built the perfect trap, and all that remained was to spring it at the moment when his enemies felt most confident of their victory. Chapter 4. The Setup. Bobby's opportunity came in early June when Linda announced she was planning a girls' weekend in the city. The lie was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Bobby knew she would be spending the weekend with Craig at his penthouse apartment. More importantly, he knew that Craig had planned to use this weekend to introduce Linda to his business associates as his new investor in the medical facility project. What Craig didn't know was that those business associates were actually investigators Bobby had hired, posing as potential clients for the new facility. They would be recording every conversation, documenting Craig's illegal plans to use Linda's money to fund his failing practice, and gathering evidence of his intention to manipulate elderly patients for financial gain. While Linda was in the city playing house with her lover, Bobby prepared for the confrontation that would destroy them both. He had spent weeks positioning all the pieces, and now it was time to execute his plan with surgical precision. The first phase involved his children. Trevor and Sophia had grown increasingly bold in their disrespect, secure in their belief that Bobby was too trusting to discover their betrayal. They had planned to use the weekend of Linda's absence to search through Bobby's office more thoroughly, looking for additional financial documents that Craig wanted. Bobby accommodated their plan perfectly. He left the house Saturday morning, ostensibly to visit his own mother in the next county. In reality, he drove only as far as a hotel where he had set up a temporary command center, complete with monitors showing feeds from all the hidden cameras in his house. He watched as Trevor and Sophia went to work, systematically photographing documents from his safe and computer files. Their efficiency was remarkable. They had clearly done this many times before. Sophia acted as a lookout while Trevor operated the camera, and they communicated with hand signals that suggested extensive practice. The most damaging footage came when they called Linda to report their findings. Bobby recorded both sides of the conversation as they discussed which documents would be most useful to Craig in planning the legal strategy for their eventual divorce proceedings. They talked about Bobby as if he were an obstacle to be removed rather than a father and husband who loved them. Sunday evening, Bobby returned home to find his children watching television in the living room, acting as if nothing had happened. Their casual indifference to their betrayal was the final confirmation he needed that they were beyond redemption. "How was Grandma?" Sophia asked with fake concern. "She's doing well," Bobby replied calmly. "She asked about you kids. I told her you've been very busy with school activities." Trevor smirked. "Yeah, real busy." Bobby smiled back. "I can see that. You both look tired. All that hard work must be exhausting." The children exchanged a glance, but they were too confident in their deception to be concerned. They had no idea that their father had documented every moment of their betrayal, creating evidence that would destroy any sympathy they might expect in the coming divorce proceedings. Monday morning, Linda returned from her weekend looking refreshed and happy. She kissed Bobby goodbye as he left for work, the same performance she had given hundreds of times before. But today would be different. Bobby had arranged for Craig to receive some unexpected news that morning. The malpractice settlements that Craig had been hiding were about to become public knowledge, thanks to an anonymous tip to the Medical Licensing Board. His insurance company would be notified simultaneously, triggering an immediate review of his coverage that would likely result in cancellation. More devastating would be the discovery that his new medical facility investment was actually controlled by Bobby Hayes, the husband of the woman he was sleeping with. The contracts Craig had signed in his desperation would allow Bobby to seize Craig's remaining assets immediately, leaving him with nothing. But Bobby wasn't finished. That evening, he had arranged for his entire family to be home for dinner. Linda had mentioned that Craig would be calling with exciting news about a business opportunity. Instead, Craig would be calling with the news that his world was collapsing and that he suspected Bobby Hayes was responsible. Bobby planned to be sitting at the dinner table with his wife and children when that call came through. He wanted to see their faces when they realized that the man they had trusted to destroy their father was actually the one being destroyed. The trap was set perfectly. All that remained was to enjoy watching his enemies realize they had been outsmarted by the dinosaur they had so thoroughly underestimated. Chapter 5. The Accusation. The call came during dessert on a Tuesday evening in mid-June. Bobby had prepared Linda's favorite meal, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, and the family was gathered around the dining room table, maintaining the facade of domestic harmony that had become their routine. Linda's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the caller ID with obvious excitement. "I need to take this," she said, starting to rise from her chair. "Actually," Bobby said calmly, not looking up from his plate, "I think we should all hear what Dr. Hoffman has to say." The color drained from Linda's face. Trevor and Sophia froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. The silence stretched for several seconds before Linda's phone stopped ringing. "I don't know what you're talking about," Linda said, but her voice lacked conviction. Bobby finally looked up, his expression neutral. "Really? Because I think Craig is having a very difficult day today. His malpractice insurance was canceled this morning. His medical license is under review, and he just discovered that his new business partner has been investigating him for fraud." Trevor was the first to recover. "Dad, what are you?" "Shut up," Bobby said quietly, and something in his tone made his son's mouth snap closed. "You'll have your chance to talk." Linda's phone rang again. This time, Bobby reached across the table and answered it himself, putting it on speaker. "Linda, thank God." Craig's voice was panicked and shaky. "Something's wrong. Everything's falling apart. Someone's been setting me up, and I think it might be your husband. We need to talk immediately. Can you meet me at—" Bobby ended the call and set the phone back on the table. The silence that followed was deafening. "Now," Bobby said, his voice still calm, "let's discuss the $90,000. Linda's confusion was genuine. "What $90,000? "Bobby, I don't understand what's happening." Bobby had been waiting for this moment for weeks. The $90,000 was the centerpiece of his trap, a sum of money that he had carefully moved and documented to create the perfect opportunity for his family to reveal their true nature. "Trevor," Bobby said, turning to his son, "would you like to explain to your mother how you've been accessing my business accounts?" Trevor's face went white. "I haven't." "Or Sophia," Bobby continued, "would you prefer to tell everyone about the photographs you've been taking of my financial documents?" Both children looked at Linda desperately, seeking guidance that she couldn't provide because she was drowning in her own panic. "The $90,000, Bobby explained with the patience of a teacher addressing slow students, was transferred from our joint savings account to an offshore account that I set up. The transfer was made using access codes that only Trevor could have provided, based on information only Sophia could have gathered from my private files." Linda found her voice. "Bobby, even if the kids made some mistakes, that doesn't mean—" "Stop lying," Bobby roared suddenly, his calm facade finally cracking. The explosion of anger was so violent that Sophia actually flinched backward. "You stole $90,000. Linda stared at him in shock. Around the table, Trevor and Sophia began nodding their heads in agreement. Sophia spoke first. "Dad, we saw the transfers. You've been moving money for months." "Mom's been so worried," Trevor added, his voice gaining confidence as he saw his sister supporting him. "She thinks you're hiding assets to keep her from getting them in the divorce." Bobby looked around the table at his family, his wife and children who were now openly accusing him of theft and deception. Their coordination was flawless, as if they had rehearsed this moment. Even in the face of his anger, they were sticking to their script. The whole family nodded, backing Linda's position against him. In that moment, Bobby realized that they had planned this confrontation too. They were ready to accuse him of financial impropriety, probably as part of Craig's strategy to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. But Bobby had one more card to play. He stood up slowly and walked to the living room, returning with his laptop. "I think," he said, his voice once again deadly calm, "we should all watch some footage." He connected the laptop to the large television mounted on the dining room wall. "Let's see what really happened to that money, shall we?" As the screen flickered to life, their smiles disappeared. The first image showed Trevor in Bobby's office at 2:15 a.m. 3 weeks earlier, photographing bank statements by the light of his phone's flashlight. The timestamp was clearly visible, as was Trevor's face when he looked directly at the camera while stealing his father's financial information. Linda gasped. Trevor tried to speak, but no words came out. Bobby clicked to the next video. This one showed Sophia on the phone in her bedroom, clearly visible through the window as she read account numbers to someone on the other end of the call. The audio was crystal clear. "These are the business accounts," Sophia's voice said. "The ones with the most money in them." One by one, Bobby displayed the evidence of their systematic betrayal. Videos of them planning their searches of his office. Recordings of phone calls with Linda and Craig. Documentation of their attempts to manipulate his elderly mother-in-law. The final video was the most damning. It showed Linda and Craig in his apartment, discussing how they would frame Bobby for financial misconduct while simultaneously stealing his assets. They talked about him with casual cruelty, laughing about his simple-minded trust in his family. When the footage ended, the dining room was completely silent. Linda was crying, but Bobby couldn't tell if the tears were from guilt or fear. Trevor and Sophia sat frozen, staring at the black television screen. The $90,000, Bobby said finally, was moved to protect it from theft, because I knew my own family was conspiring to steal everything I had built. He closed the laptop and looked around the table one final time. Now, he said, let's discuss what happens next. Chapter 6, The Revelation. Bobby's revelation hit the room like a demolition charge, leaving his family sitting in stunned silence among the wreckage of their carefully constructed lies. But he wasn't finished. The evidence he had just shown them was only the foundation for what came next. Linda, Bobby said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded construction crews through dangerous projects, I need you to call Craig back. Tell him to come here immediately. Bobby, please, Linda whispered. Let's just talk about this. We can work through. Call him, Bobby repeated, and there was something in his tone that made further argument impossible. With shaking hands, Linda dialed Craig's number. When he answered, she could barely speak. Craig, you need to come to the house. Bobby knows everything. I'm not coming anywhere near that psychopath. Craig's voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Linda, get out of there right now. Pack what you can and meet me at the airport. We're leaving tonight. Bobby took the phone from Linda's unresisting hand. Dr. Hoffman, he said pleasantly, this is Bobby Hayes. I think you and I need to have a conversation. Go to hell, Craig snarled. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Linda and I are going to disappear, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Actually, Bobby said, I think you'll find that your travel options are somewhat limited. You see, Craig, I've been learning some interesting things about your background. Your first wife's death, for instance. The one that was ruled accidental but never properly investigated. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. I don't know what you think you know, Craig said finally, but his voice had lost its confidence. I know that you've been systematically drugging elderly patients to make them more compliant when you discuss their treatment options. I know that you've been overbilling insurance companies for procedures that were never performed. And I know that you killed your first wife when she discovered your medical license fraud. Bobby had spent weeks building this case, working with private investigators and forensic accountants to uncover the truth about Craig Hoffman. What he had discovered was a pattern of behavior that went back over 15 years, a carefully constructed career built on exploitation, fraud, and ultimately murder. You're insane, Craig said, but his voice was shaking now. Perhaps, Bobby agreed, but I'm also thorough. All of this evidence has been turned over to the FBI, the State Medical Board, and the District Attorney's Office. I imagine they'll want to speak with you very soon. The line went dead. Bobby set Linda's phone on the table and looked at his family. Craig won't be joining us tonight, he said. He's probably driving toward the state line as fast as he can, though I doubt he'll make it very far. Linda was staring at him in horror. Bobby, what have you done? I protected my family, Bobby said simply, which is more than I can say for any of you. Trevor finally found his voice. Dad, we didn't know about any of that stuff. We just thought. You thought Craig was a successful doctor who could provide your mother with a better life than her boring husband could, Bobby finished. You didn't care about investigating his background or questioning his motives. You just wanted what he was offering. Sophia was crying now, but Bobby felt no sympathy for her tears. We're sorry, Daddy. We made a mistake. No, Bobby said, his voice final. You made a choice. All of you made choices over and over again for months. You chose to lie to me. You chose to steal from me. You chose to conspire with a predator who was planning to murder my mother-in-law for her insurance money. Linda gasped. What? Oh, yes, Bobby said, turning to his wife. Craig's interest in your mother wasn't romantic. He was planning to increase her medication gradually until she suffered what would appear to be a natural heart attack. He's done it before, and he was planning to do it again. Your mother's $2.3 million life insurance policy was going to fund your new life together. The revelation that they had been accessories to a planned murder seemed to finally penetrate their self-absorption. Linda looked genuinely sick, and both children were staring at their father in shock. "But you stopped it," Trevor said hopefully. "So everything's okay now, right?" Bobby looked at his son with something approaching pity. "Trevor, nothing about this is okay. You and your sister helped a murder plan to kill your grandmother. Your mother entered into a conspiracy to steal everything I've worked for my entire life. And all of you treated me like an enemy who deserved to be destroyed." He stood up from the table, looking down at his family one final time. "The question now," he said, "is what happens to each of you." Bobby walked to the front window and looked out at the circular driveway. Right on schedule. He could see the headlights of several vehicles approaching the house. "Actually," he said, turning back to his family, "I think that question is about to be answered for us." The first vehicle to pull up was an FBI sedan. Behind it came two local police cruisers and an unmarked car that Bobby recognized as belonging to the district attorney's office. Linda's face went white. "Bobby, what did you do?" "I did what I had to do," Bobby said as the first agent approached the front door. "I protected myself from my enemies." The doorbell rang, and Bobby walked calmly toward the front hallway. "The thing about betrayal," he said over his shoulder, "is that it always comes with consequences. You just never bothered to consider what those consequences might be." Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The FBI agents were led by Special Agent Rebecca Torres, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with complex financial crimes. Bobby had been working with her for 3 weeks, providing evidence of Craig's medical fraud and Linda's involvement in the conspiracy to manipulate his mother-in-law's will. "Mr. Hayes," Agent Torres said as Bobby opened the door, "we appreciate your cooperation in this investigation. We're here to speak with your wife and children about their involvement with Dr. Craig Hoffman." Bobby stepped aside, allowing the agents to enter his home. Linda, Trevor, and Sophia remained frozen at the dining room table, staring at the badges and official documentation that would tear their lives apart. "Linda Hayes," Agent Torres said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." As Agent Torres read Linda her rights, Bobby watched his wife's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally terror. She had gambled everything on Craig's promises, never imagining that her boring, predictable husband might be capable of orchestrating her complete destruction. "Trevor and Sophia Hayes," another agent said, approaching the children, "you're both being charged as juveniles for identity theft and fraud. Given your ages, you'll be processed through family court." The twins began crying as the reality of their situation finally penetrated their teenage certainty. They had seen themselves as sophisticated players in an adult game, never realizing they were actually pawns being manipulated by people far more experienced in deception than they could ever imagine. As the agents processed his family, Bobby felt no satisfaction. There was no joy in watching his wife handcuffed or his children led away by social services. But there was a cold sense of completion, like the moment when a controlled demolition brought down a condemned building. Agent Torres approached Bobby as the last of the paperwork was completed. "Mr. Hayes, I want you to know that your evidence was crucial in preventing what could have been a series of murders. Dr. Hoffman's pattern of behavior suggests he's killed at least 3 people over the past decade. What happens to him now?" Bobby asked. "He was arrested trying to cross into Mexico about 2 hours ago," Torres replied. "He'll be extradited back here to face charges including murder, medical fraud, and conspiracy. With the evidence you provided, he'll never see freedom again." Bobby nodded. "And my family? Your wife will likely face 5 to 10 years in federal prison, depending on her cooperation. The children will be processed through juvenile court, but given the severity of their actions and their ages, they'll likely face significant consequences as well." After the agents left, Bobby stood alone in his dining room, looking at the abandoned plates and the laptop that had delivered his family's destruction. The house felt different now, empty in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of people. His phone rang. It was his attorney, Marcus Webb, who had been coordinating the legal aspects of Bobby's plan. "It's done," Marcus reported. "The divorce papers have been filed, citing adultery and fraud. Given Linda's arrest, the court will likely award you everything. The children's trust funds have been frozen pending the outcome of their criminal cases." Bobby had known this moment would come for months, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Everything he had built, his marriage, his family, his role as husband and father, was gone. He had chosen to destroy it all rather than accept betrayal, and now he faced the consequences of that choice. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and documentation. Bobby's mother-in-law called, crying and confused about why Linda had been arrested. His business partners called, concerned about the negative publicity. His own mother called from her nursing home, having seen the news on television. To each of them, Bobby gave the same explanation. His family had made choices that forced him to protect himself and others from their criminal behavior. He felt no need to justify his actions or seek sympathy for his losses. By midnight, Bobby was alone in his house, sitting in his home office where everything had begun. The hidden cameras were still recording, but there was nothing left to capture. His enemies had been defeated, his betrayers had been punished, and his empire remained intact. But victory, Bobby was learning, was a cold comfort when it required destroying everything you had once loved. He thought about his father, who had died alone rather than abandon his principles. Frank Hayes had taught his son that a man's integrity was worth more than comfort, happiness, or even love. Bobby had honored that lesson, but the price had been higher than he had anticipated. Outside, rain began falling on the perfectly manicured grounds of his estate. Inside, Bobby Hayes sat in the silence of his empty house, master of everything he surveyed and utterly alone in his triumph. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. 3 months later, Bobby stood in the marble-floored lobby of the federal courthouse, watching through tall windows as news vans lined the street outside. Craig Hoffman's trial had begun, and the media attention was intense. The story had everything reporters loved: sex, money, murder, and a dramatic reversal that nobody had seen coming. Craig had aged visibly since his arrest. The confident, handsome doctor who had seduced Bobby's wife was gone, replaced by a haggard man in an orange jumpsuit who could barely make eye contact with the cameras. His legal team had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Bobby's evidence was too comprehensive. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty. Linda's trial had concluded the previous week. She had pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 7 years in federal prison. Her attorney had argued that she was a victim of Craig's manipulation, but the recorded conversations between them had made it clear that she was a willing participant in every aspect of their scheme. During her sentencing hearing, Linda had looked directly at Bobby for the first time since her arrest. The beautiful, confident woman he had married was gone. Prison had stripped away her carefully maintained appearance, revealing someone older and harder than he remembered. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, she had apologized to the court but never looked at her husband. Bobby felt nothing when she was led away in shackles. The woman he had loved was gone, if she had ever really existed at all. Trevor and Sophia's cases had been handled in juvenile court, but the outcomes were severe. Both had been sentenced to 3 years in juvenile detention, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. They would both turn 18 while incarcerated, and their criminal records would follow them into adulthood. The twins had written letters to Bobby from detention, begging for forgiveness and claiming they understood now how wrong they had been. Bobby had returned the letters unopened. His children had made adult choices, and they would live with adult consequences. His mother-in-law, Dorothy Morrison, had initially blamed Bobby for her daughter's imprisonment. But as the details of Craig's plan to murder her became public, her anger had shifted to confusion and then to grudging gratitude. She had moved to Florida to live with her sister, selling her house and cutting all ties to her former life. Danny Morrison had visited Bobby once after the trials ended, ostensibly to thank him for protecting their mother. But the real purpose of his visit became clear when he asked if Bobby might help him with some gambling debts that had become problematic. Bobby had listened to Danny's sob story with the patience he might show a persistent sales representative. When Danny finished, Bobby had simply said, "No," and shown him to the door. Danny was Linda's brother, which made him part of the family that had betrayed him. Blood meant nothing when trust was broken. The business had continued to thrive despite the scandal. If anything, the publicity had enhanced Bobby's reputation in certain circles. The construction industry respected strength, and Bobby's willingness to destroy his own family rather than accept betrayal had earned him a fearsome respect among his competitors and partners. He had received dozens of offers from women seeking to fill the void left by Linda's absence. Wealthy divorcees, young real estate agents looking for advancement, even some of Linda's former friends who claimed they had always suspected she was unworthy of him. Bobby declined all offers politely but firmly. He had learned too much about the price of trust to risk it again casually. The house felt different now. Bobby had renovated Linda's office and the children's bedrooms, removing all traces of their presence. The dining room where he had confronted them had been completely redesigned. He wanted no reminders of the people who had lived there before. Some evenings, Bobby would walk through the empty rooms and remember what it had felt like to be a husband and father. The memories weren't painful anymore. They felt more like scenes from a movie about someone else's life. That version of Bobby Hayes had died the night he learned about his family's betrayal, and the man who remained was fundamentally different. His father would have approved, Bobby thought. Frank Hayes had always said that a man who compromised his principles for comfort would eventually lose both. Bobby had chosen principles over family, integrity over love, and strength over forgiveness. The cost had been everything he once valued, but he regretted nothing. Outside the courthouse, reporters were interviewing Craig's victims' families. People whose lives had been destroyed by the predator Bobby's family had welcomed into their home. Watching them, Bobby felt the same cold satisfaction he experienced when demolishing a dangerous building. Some structures couldn't be repaired. They had to be torn down completely to protect everyone around them. His marriage had been one of those structures. So had his relationship with his children. Better to destroy them completely than to let them collapse gradually, taking innocent people down with them. Bobby Hayes walked back to his truck, alone but undefeated. He had built an empire once, and he could build another if he chose. But this time, he would build it on foundations that couldn't be shaken by betrayal or weakened by misplaced trust. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed on the final chapter of Craig Hoffman's life of deception. Ahead lay whatever Bobby chose to build from the ashes of his former life. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. 5 years had passed since the trials ended, and Bobby Hayes stood in the cemetery where his father was buried, holding a letter that had arrived that morning. The envelope bore the return address of the Federal Women's Correctional Facility where Linda was serving her sentence. It was the 15th letter she had sent. Like the others, it remained unopened. Bobby had made a ritual of bringing Linda's letters to his father's grave and burning them, unread. He had no interest in her apologies, her explanations, or her pleas for reconciliation. She had made her choice when she chose Craig Hoffman over her family. Nothing she could say now would change that fundamental reality. The wind picked up as he struck the match, carrying the ashes of Linda's words across the peaceful cemetery grounds. Nearby, other families tended graves and left flowers for loved ones who had earned their grief. Bobby felt no connection to their sorrow. Death was final, but betrayal was worse. It poisoned every memory that came before it. His phone buzzed with a text message from his lawyer. Trevor would be released from juvenile detention in 3 months, and Sophia 6 months after that. Both had requested contact with their father through their social workers. Both requests had been denied. The twins had made their choice as surely as Linda had made hers. They had looked Bobby in the eye and helped a murder plan to steal everything he had built. Their age at the time was irrelevant. They had been old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong, and they had chosen wrong deliberately. Bobby's business empire had grown significantly in the 5 years since his family's betrayal. Hayes and Associates now operated in 4 states, with over 200 employees and contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had built a new headquarters building in the industrial district, a monument to success that bore his name in steel letters 20 feet tall. The new building had no family photos in the executive offices. No pictures of smiling children or anniversary celebrations lined Bobby's desk. He had learned that such displays were vulnerabilities, advertising the existence of people who could be used against him. Better to project strength and isolation than to reveal anything that enemies might exploit. His personal life had settled into a comfortable routine of solitude and control. He lived alone in his renovated house, maintaining the perfect grounds and immaculate interior as a reflection of his internal discipline. He dated occasionally, but never seriously, never allowing anyone close enough to matter. Some might have called it a lonely existence, but Bobby saw it as freedom. He owed nothing to anyone, and no one could disappoint him. He slept well at night, untroubled by guilt or regret. His choices had been necessary, his actions justified, his principles uncompromised. The construction industry had made him wealthy beyond his father's wildest dreams, but more importantly, it had taught him lessons about human nature that no amount of money could buy. People were like buildings. You could never be sure of their structural integrity until you applied pressure. Most would collapse when tested, revealing themselves to be built on weak foundations. Bobby's phone rang as he walked back to his truck. The caller ID showed his mother's nursing home. She was 91 now, and her calls had become increasingly rare as dementia clouded her memory of recent events. Bobby, her voice was thin but lucid. I've been thinking about Linda and the children. Maybe it's time to forgive them. Family is all we have in the end. Bobby listened to his mother's gentle plea with the patience he would show any confused elderly person. She had forgotten, as she often did, the details of what his family had done. In her declining memory, Linda was still the sweet daughter-in-law who brought flowers, and Trevor and Sophia were still innocent grandchildren who deserved love. "Mom," Bobby said gently, "they made their choice. I made mine. That's the end of it." "But Bobby, forgiveness is what separates us from." "From what, Mom? From justice? From consequences? From protecting ourselves from people who would destroy us." His mother was quiet for a moment. "From becoming the kind of people who destroy their own families," she said finally. Bobby ended the call without responding. His mother didn't understand, couldn't understand, what it felt like to discover that the people you loved most had been planning your destruction. She had lived a simple life with a faithful husband who died heroically rather than betray his principles. She had never faced the choice between forgiveness and survival. That evening, Bobby sat in his home office, reviewing the financial reports that showed his continued success. Every number on every page represented his victory over those who had tried to bring him down. He had not merely survived their betrayal. He had thrived because of it, using their treachery as motivation to build something greater than they could have imagined. The house was silent around him, perfectly maintained and completely empty of human warmth. Some men might have found such isolation crushing, but Bobby found it peaceful. He had learned that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Love was a weakness that could be exploited, and forgiveness was an invitation for further betrayal. Outside, the grounds of his estate stretched into darkness, protected by security systems and high fences. Inside, Bobby Hayes sat alone with his principles intact and his empire secure. He had paid the price of his integrity in loneliness and isolation, but he considered it a fair trade. His father had died alone rather than compromise his values. Bobby lived alone for the same reason. Some legacies were worth preserving, regardless of the cost. The letter from Linda smoldered in the cemetery ash, its words unread and its promises unheard. Tomorrow would bring another day of solitary success, another day of principled isolation, another day of uncompromising strength. Bobby Hayes had built his empire twice, once on love and trust, and once on strength and discipline. Only the second version had proven capable of surviving contact with human nature. He regretted nothing, forgave no one, and expected nothing from anyone. In his world, that wasn't loneliness, it was wisdom. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.